So let's just dive right in. We're going to talk about a huge, almost invisible problem that I think affects all of us, the consumption paradox. You know that feeling? You feel busy, you feel productive, but your life, well, it stays exactly the same. We are going to break down why learning without actually doing anything is one of the biggest traps in our modern world.
Okay, let's start with a really honest question for you. And I want you to really think about it for a second. What is the last thing you learned that truly fundamentally changed how you act day to day? Not just a cool fact, but a real change in your behavior. It's kind of tough to answer, right? If you're struggling to think of something, trust me, you are not alone. And that's exactly what we're here to unpack. So what's actually going on in our brains here? Well, the core of this whole problem is a cognitive bias with a fancy name, the illusion of explanatory depth. It's this fascinating and kind of tricky quirk of our minds where we're incredibly confident we understand something right up until someone asks us to explain it, or even worse, to actually apply it. And this right here is the heart of the illusion. You finish a book, you watch a tutorial, and it feels like a real achievement. You get this rush of familiarity, and your brain just completely confuses that feeling with genuine competence. You feel like you've gained a new skill when all you've really done is acquire a summary. This feeling leads us straight into the science behind the trap. So let's take a look at why our brains are so easily hooked on this endless cycle of just consuming. Just look at the difference here. On one side, you've got consumption dopamine. That's the quick, easy, fleeting little hit of a reward chemical we get from learning something new. It's our brain's reward for acquiring information. But then on the other side, you have problem-solving satisfaction. This is the messy, difficult, but deeply lasting satisfaction that comes from actually applying it. One is a quick high with no risk. The other is hard-earned confidence. You know, the ancient Greeks actually had a word for this gap between knowing and doing, akresia. It's that moment you choose the comfort of finding the perfect information in just one more video over the chaotic, unpredictable reality of actually trying the thing. It's really just a very sophisticated form of procrastination, all to avoid the risk of failure. And here's the kicker. This problem is being supercharged. I mean, right now, with this endless flood of AI-generated content, it has never been easier to fill every single waking moment with consumption. This creates the perfect environment for acrosia to just completely take over, making us feel incredibly informed while we're actually standing perfectly still. So what's the actual measurable cost of falling into this passive learning trap? When you look at the numbers, they're pretty staggering. So get this. A study from the University of California found that the average American consumes about 34 gigabytes of information every single day. That's the equivalent of over 100,000 words bombarding your brain daily. No wonder we feel overwhelmed. And what's the result of that constant bombardment? Our attention spans are shrinking dramatically. A Microsoft study found that the average human attention span has now dropped to just 8 seconds. We're getting way better at skimming and scanning, but we're getting so much worse at the deep focus that you need for real implementation. And it gets worse. When we're constantly switching between tasks, like checking emails while you're trying to watch a tutorial, our productivity can absolutely plummet by as much as 40%. This isn't just a feeling of being distracted, it's a huge, measurable loss of your effectiveness. This chart from a Rescue Time survey really just brings it all home. It shows that the average knowledge worker spends a shocking 40% of their workday multitasking. I mean, think about that. That's nearly half of your entire workday lost to just switching contexts, feeding that consumption cycle instead of driving real, actual progress. Okay, that's enough about the problem. It's pretty clear, right? So let's talk about the solution. How do we break this cycle and finally make that shift from passively knowing to actively doing? So the very first step is a simple but powerful mental shift. You've got to move from just-in-case learning to just-in-time learning. See, most of us are taught to just hoard information, just in case we need it someday. But the much more effective approach is to seek out information to solve a specific problem you're facing right now. This matters so much because an insight's value just decays exponentially the longer it stays theoretical. You have to apply it, and you have to apply it fast. As the learning expert Marsha Connor put it, and this is so important, active learning is what builds real, lasting skills. Passive consumption, just hearing something or reading or watching, it simply doesn't engage our brains deeply enough to create any meaningful long-term change. And we even have the hard data to prove this. A randomized trial with medical students found that the ones who engaged in interactive, active learning scored significantly higher on a test of their knowledge compared to when they were just sitting in a passive lecture. We're talking a major advantage. So action isn't just a nice feel-good idea, it is a scientifically better way to learn, period. So how do we actually put this into practice? Well, David Kolb's experiential learning cycle gives us this brilliant, simple framework. It's a continuous loop. You have an experience, you reflect on it, you form a concept from it, and then you experiment with that new concept. And a great rule of thumb to force yourself into this cycle, try the 1-to-1 ratio. For every single hour you spend consuming information, spend an hour in messy, unpolished, real-world execution.
All right, let's get even more practical. How do you actually build this bias for action into your everyday life? Here are some simple, really powerful tools you can start using today. The biggest barrier to action is often just the fear of not doing it perfectly. The solution is something called minimum viable effort. Just ask yourself this one question. What is the absolute smallest, tiniest step I can take right now to make progress? Remember, messy output creates a feedback loop that clarifies theory so much better than just rereading the same chapter ever will.
And here is a fantastic little script to turn that idea into a reality. It's called the 48-hour experiment. It forces you to define the problem, come up with a quick hypothesis, and most importantly, design a tiny, time-bound test. This takes a vague idea and transforms it into a concrete, low-risk action plan. It's brilliant.
Okay, and finally, to sustain this bias for action, you've got to play defense. You have to actively, strategically manage the information you allow into your mind. This is all about building what I call a strategic information diet. Your new rules should be simple. Before you consume anything, just ask, does this directly support something I am actively trying to do? Think of it like the 80-20 rule for your brain. Which 20% of information is going to drive 80% of your actual growth? Focus there. Unsubscribe from all the rest, and seriously, schedule time away from screens to let your own thoughts finally surface. And it all boils down to this one simple idea. We think we need more information to find clarity, but the truth is, most of us are confused because we know too much and we haven't acted on any of it. Real clarity emerges when you subtract the noise and just focus on what's essential. So here is the challenge. The ultimate test of whether you've really understood any of this is what you do in the next 5 minutes. Don't just click on the next video. Close this window. Pick one single idea you've just heard and take the smallest possible action on it right now. That is how you break the paradox.